And welcome to the CJN Daily and the fourth episode of our CJN Daily podcast, where we pay tribute to Jewish leaders who have passed away in recent weeks. Now we've got a brand new name, so from now on we're going to be called the CJN Daily Honourable Mention, where we give honourable mention to Honourable Mention. And to do that, I'm joined, as always, by our CJN emeritus reporter, Ron Csillag. Good to see you, Ron.
Oh, it's good to be here. Good to be here.
Today's episode is interesting because it's a lot of women. Usually we talked a lot about in the last three episodes about men who passed away, right. Irving Abella and some of the Holocaust survivor. Max Eisen was the last one. And today we're talking about 4 women and one man.
If you want, we can have a discussion on why we haven't done women in great quantity. There's a reason for it, and there's a reason for it in the obit writing community. If we have time, we can get to it later.
No, tell us now. What do you think?
Well, I was always asked when I was writing obits, why so many men all the time? Where are the women? The answer is really demographic, that the people who are dying today at age 90 made their mark at a time when women weren't making their mark yet or weren't in a position to. Either women were excluded or told to stay home and have babies. 50, 60 years ago, that was the case. I always tell people, wait a few years and you'll see more women who have made their mark. And not deliberately today, we have 4 great women who've made their mark. And see, that has to do with the fact that they came up at a time when women were starting to enter the workforce and were permitted to have an impact.
And on public life too, not just workforce, but in the volunteer sector, very important. So shall we start off with a woman who has a famous last name, Corinne Bronfman, originally from Montreal. She passed away just recently, just a couple of weeks ago.
She died on October 7th. She was part of the Bronfman family. If you go online, you see a giant tree of the Bronfman family. You'll find her father in there. His name was Gerald. And the late Marjorie. She was born in Montreal. Corinne became an artist. She attended school. And like all young people who wanted to be an artist, she moved to Paris, where she was an adventurous and very free-spirited person, we were told. And her work hangs in many private collections. I believe it's also in the National Gallery. So she obviously had a talent. But what I find most interesting about her is that I've never heard of an artist who became an economist. You hear about economists who dabble in art, but not the other way around. She was really serious about it. She had a midlife career change in 1988, and she earned a PhD in economics from NYU. So she was not just a dabbler and not a dilettante. She was the real deal. And she abandoned her artistic career, at least full time. She went to work as a professor at, I believe, the University of Arizona. She was based in Tucson. And then she became an economist for the U.S. Treasury Department in Washington. Then she retired, and then she devoted herself to a bunch of philanthropic endeavors, a lot of these microfinance organizations, something in Georgetown, the waterfront park. She was a really wide-ranging, not a dabbler at all, brave, very self-reliant person. And she got muscular dystrophy for much of her life. She swam, she exercised, and as there's a bit of a cliche, but it's true, she lived life on her own terms. So another interesting woman who's left us.
And on the same theme as disability, the next person we want to speak to was mainly an activist for people in the disabled community. So let's talk about the late Helen Wolfe.
I think the key to ensuring that each child meets his full potential is thinking of the classroom as a community of learners. I think the teacher has to show students how to help one another and celebrate that kind of collaboration.
Yeah, Helen Wolfe was different in the sense that she was born disabled. She was born with spina bifida at a time when very little was known about it, deformation of the spine. And she went through school at a time when people with disabilities were segregated. She went to an elementary school where kids were segregated. She was told she wouldn't wind up as much. She went to university. She went to Teachers College, where on the very first day of Teachers College, the principal told her she should quit because she would never get a job. She used the wheelchair. She used crutches. She didn't use a wheelchair all that much. She used a scooter and occasionally a wheelchair, but mostly crutches to get around. She had a very fierce determination to live life to the fullest. She really upended a lot of social norms that existed at the time, but stereotypes that described people with disabilities and held them back. We lost her over the summer.
She was from Toronto?
She was from Toronto. She died less than 2 weeks after her disease was diagnosed, which was cancer. So she went very, very quickly. She was 69, so she was fairly young. She spent 37 years as a teacher, bucking that trend. 37 years. She taught English as a second language to new immigrants and refugees at 3 schools in the Toronto District School Board. She authored 37 teachers' guides.
Wow.
And she wrote 3 books about people who overcame some sort of obstacle or another. And there's one, I believe, coming out early next year posthumously. So we'll have to wait and see what that is. But quite a remarkable woman who never took no for an answer, who traveled widely. And one of her great memories was climbing Masada, which she did by cable car.
Now, I want to bring up somebody who we've been meaning to talk about all summer since she passed away, Sheila Goldbloom. She has a famous last name as well, and maybe you can tell our audience listeners, they might have heard of the name already from sort of Quebec Jewish, Montreal Jewish royalty.
Well, I don't normally like to define women by their husbands, but in this case, the name is a household name in Quebec. Victor Goldbloom was her husband. He was a very well-known pediatrician. But what his claim to fame was becoming Quebec's first Jewish cabinet minister. And that was quite a coup for the Jewish community. He later became, I believe
Commissioner of Official Languages.
Yeah. And she had a famous son. I just want to say a shout out to Michael Goldbloom, who I believe became the publisher of the Montreal Gazette for a while.
Did. Yeah.
But Sheila was a force majeure in her own right. She was American. She graduated from Mount Holyoke in 1947. It's true, women didn't graduate from college too much in those days, but it was a women's college and very prestigious in Massachusetts. As we say, she died in July, a grand old age of 96. She became a social work professor at McGill. She was well known as a community volunteer, and that's a term that doesn't even begin to describe the number of organizations, educational, social, that she served. She was an educator, an early champion of the McGill Middle East Program for Civil Society and Peace Building. It's known as something else today, the International Community Action Network. That's brought together Israelis, Palestinians, Jordanians, to at least begin something of a dialogue. She was an advocate for, later in life, vulnerable seniors. She was 82 when she was appointed by the Quebec government to lead a commission that toured the province, listening to what is it the elderly wanted. And so her first job was actually with the League of Women Voters in her native city. She had a huge impact on the social network of Quebec. She also retired late in life worked, I believe, until 1992. And then she became an active political wife, as they were known in those days. And she was sort of lent a human face to whatever it is the Quebec government was doing. And she was really an amazing human being. She had a unique gift to make everyone feel heard, as she was described, respected, appreciated. And the list of organizations that she was involved in was huge. She did Meals on Wheels in Montreal, the Batshaw Youth Centers, Jewish Family Services. She was involved in Vanier College and so on.
And I know that when she passed away, they wrote that she had written a book in her later years. And she was I remember listening to an interview that they did with her, that she was sort of afraid to write a book, but her kids sort of, told her, okay, you can do this. And she wrote a book. Do you have the name of it?
In her memoir was actually called Opening Doors, which says a lot about her life. And that was only published 3 years ago.
I really care. I think change has to happen or we're going to blow up the world. That we have to learn how to look at other people and other things that are not looking in, if it's black, if it does green, and what have you. Look beyond it, or get involved in some way of getting conversation. Otherwise, it's very difficult.
Now, it is Holocaust Education Month, November, Kristallnacht, and lots of programming across Canada and around the world about the Holocaust. And we would be remiss if we didn't share the story of the late Nancy Kleinberg. You listeners may have seen her story and her husband's story in other media as well, not just the Canadian Jewish News, because they had a love story that should have been a movie and probably was.
This is a story where Nancy Kleinberg met her future husband, the man who would become her husband, at Bergen-Belsen. what made this different was that Howard, her husband-to-be, after liberation of Bergen-Belsen in April of 1945, was as near death as anyone could be. He was suffering from typhus, as everyone probably else was, starvation, dysentery. She walked into the room because she was looking for her brother, who she had visited in that barracks. It was the men's barracks. And there was Howard. And he was on the floor among all the corpses, but he was alive.
But when I saw him lying on the ground, I said to my aunt and my friend and her sister, he's still alive. We're going to try and nurse him back to health. And they said, Nancy, are you crazy? Can't you see he's dead? And I said, he's not dead yet. If we let him lie here, for sure will die.
I mean, it already sounds like a movie, right? He looked very sick. She took care of him for 3 weeks, nursed him back to health as much as she could with the available whatever she had, medical, water, food, medical. She walked into the barracks one day and he wasn't there. Turns out the British, who helped liberate the place, took him to a hospital. And then they found each other again in Toronto after the war. And they got married. I mean, it's an amazing story. And they were married for 63 years. And he found her. He went to visit her. I think he took flowers with him and said, do you remember me? And her first response was, oh, it's you? And then he started to thank her, and I'm sure there were many tears involved. And he said he lacked words for how he thanked her. No kidding. 3 years later, they got married. I'm not sure about whether Howard's still with us or not, but they have 4 children, or they had 4 children, about a dozen grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. So that's the legacy of a woman who met her beshert, as they say, and nursed him back to life, not just back to health, but back to life.
They were also very popular Holocaust speakers, yes. Holocaust educators. They filled a very important role when they were living in Toronto as well, and told their story to the world. It was an international story when it came out. Yeah,
and I think they're on file at a school in Toronto that collects Holocaust survivors' memoirs called Crestwood. Mm-hmm. And this was the kind of story that is irresistible to everyone, especially kids. Kids loved this story. We'll
put a link to that interview and the video in our show notes. Mm-hmm. And we've got time for a man. The late Kurt Rothschild passed away. Can you tell us a little bit about who he was and how much he accomplished?
Well, Kurt was synonymous with mostly religious Zionist and Orthodox causes. The list was huge. Another very interesting life, born in Germany in 1920. His parents sent him to England in 1937, and he came to Canada around 1940, where he landed, and New Brunswick interned him for 18 months behind barbed wire, because that was Canada's policy, because he was German, and he was interned as an enemy alien. After that, he studied electrical engineering. Then he began a business career. As an Orthodox Jew, he obviously believed in the importance of involvement in the community. He was active in former Soviet Union countries, but he was sort of the central pillar of, as I recall, Shaare Zedek Medical Center, the Jerusalem College of Technology, and definitely Bar-Ilan University. And he raised millions of dollars for these causes. He was married to his wife Edith for 70 years. There's something. They made Aliyah in 2012. From Toronto. And he began to devote more time and attention to communities in sort of Israel's outer fringes, its periphery, towns that were established in the Negev, where people needed help, where and especially those Israelis who were displaced from the Gaza Strip. When Gaza was handed over to the Palestinians, there was a Jewish settlement in Gush Kativ. All these people were displaced. They had to rebuild their lives. Kurt was there to help them. He was in touch with Israeli leaders. He was on good terms with, even though they were on opposite sides of the political spectrum, with Shimon Peres, obviously Benjamin Netanyahu. He was another life well lived, and never strayed for a moment from his Orthodox roots.
What I find interesting about the Jerusalem College that you mentioned is that it's in the news now because they are trying to teach Haredi boys to be engineers and not just study Torah all the time. Yeah. And so it's become a big cause célèbre for fundraising. And in fact, they just had a large event in Canada. They had former U.S. Ambassador Nikki Haley speak at the same time in Toronto with the former Israeli ambassador to the UN, Danny Danon.
You're right. Kurt definitely believed in higher education. It's not that he looked down on people who devote their lives to studying Torah and Talmud all day. He never would have said so. But he made an extra effort to get people interested in science and technology, thus his support for the Jerusalem College of Technology. It's known as Machon Lev, and definitely Bar-Ilan University, which is an Orthodox institution.
The image of 1 million Jewish children that were slaughtered by the Nazis always remained with me, and I feel therefore that we have an obligation to do honor to their memory by working for the Jewish people and helping to guarantee their existence physically here in Israel.
Fascinating lives. You can read more about all these people on the CJN website, the CJN.ca. And we'll end with 2 quick shout outs to 2 honorable mention who we don't have room to go into at fully today, but they are very well known in Ontario circles. So first is Harvey Rosen, the late mayor of Kingston.
Harvey Rosen was the first and only Jewish mayor of the city of Kingston. He rose to that distinction in 2003. There was a big article about him in the CJN at the time that I wrote. There was a bit of a controversy. He championed this. He was best known for championing this massive complex. It was actually renamed for a while, I think, the
K-Rock Center.
Yeah, the K-Rock Center. 700 seats, lots of acts and so on. He was reelected, though, by a very, very slim margin in 2006.
And in Ottawa, one of the founders of the Jewish community, Chick Taylor, passed away recently. His claim to fame for people who live in Ottawa is in the grocery business.
Chick and his brother Irving, who died in 2012, were owners of several IGA Loeb stores throughout Ottawa.
And these are our honorable mention. Once again, it's been great to learn about all these important leaders. Thanks, Ron, for all your stories about them. And as always, we're open for suggestions from you, the audience. Who should we talk about next time? If you'd like to get in touch with us, email me at ebessner@thecjn.ca. Any last words?
No last words, not yet. Not from me, but stay tuned.
As my late father, always used to say, we're still on the right side of the grass today. All right, thanks so much.
Thank you.